Yes. Vi har noen minutter til, Kristina.
Ja.
Ja.
I think we will just wait 1 more minute, then we can start. Yes. Okay, then I think it's time to start this session. I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And my name is Kristina von Övrreich, and I'm working as the Sustainability Manager at KTH, Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm in Sweden. And today I'm very happy because I will be your moderator, and I would also have the possibility to do the summary and do some conclusions. We have a title on this session: You and University Networks discuss the plea for a holistic approach to contribution of universities to sustainability. And we will start from a very broad perspective and explore the role of the UN and the SDGs as a communication tool. And then 3 university networks will share their experience and the work they are doing with sustainability. And then we will end the session with a panel discussion where the universities will have the opportunity to discuss and interact how we best can shape and transform ideas into sustainable impact. And I would also, before we start the program of the event, ask you if you have some questions to ask them in the Q&A toolbox at the bottom of your screen. I think that is good because then we can have the questions during the time when our speakers have the presentations, but also that we save some of the questions to the panel debate. And this is the program of the event. You can see it here. We will start with this introduction, and then we will have the speaker's presentation. And then we will have a break around 4 o'clock. And then we also, then after the break, we start with the speaker's presentations. And then we need also a break again before we have the panel debate. And then we will have the summary and also discuss the next steps. And then I think we should start with the presentations. And I would like to welcome the first speaker, Jakob Trollbäck. He's the creator of the communication language for the UN SDG and also founder of the new division. And the title of his presentation is the Equivalence for Sustainability, UN SDG are the new periodic table for the world. Using it helps to find systematic solutions for the future. So I will leave the floor to Jacob so he can share his presentation, and I will stop share.
Thank you very much, Christina. I'm delighted to be here. So let me just get my presentation up here. There. So I'm happy to talk to you all about a little bit about how to understand the SDGs, or the global goals, as we talk about them. And this is something that my company, the new division, is working very hard on. So first, I would like to say a few words about communication. And the first thing I think we should all remember is that information is not communication. Information in itself doesn't want anything. Information comes in different forms, but they're basically data points that we're using to make decisions out from. But how do you engage people in this? Well, you have to use communication. And when you're talking about communication, then all of a sudden you do have a purpose. And sometimes that purpose is just to create understanding. There can be many other purposes also. I come originally from the commercial world of advertising and marketing. So, but this is something that I think we should all think about, like how can we make sure that we communicate? How do we make sure that we have a language that other people can understand? And for me, this journey started in December 2014, when I got a document from the UN that has a very great title, The Road to Dignity by 2030, Ending Poverty, Transforming All Lives, and Protecting the Planet. So the idea was to try to figure out a way to communicate this system. And how did it look from the beginning? Well, it wasn't very, it wasn't something that we found that it would be easy to make popular. This is something that we were thinking very hard about. How do you convert this information into something that people can talk about? How do you, in a sense, convert this list into this system? And for me, the journey started with just getting basic understanding, putting up basic sort of road signs. And what we did was that we looked at all of the goals and we said, can we make this easier in some way, something that can make this simple? So for example, end poverty in all its form everywhere became no poverty. So we lost a lot of words, and we also moved the goal post. We said that this, if we're going to achieve this in 15 years, then we should talk about the goal picture and not about the journey there. So we went through all of the 17 goals: ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all, became just quality education. And in some case, these titles were almost laughable if you think about them as a name for something that you're going to work with. For example, protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. All extremely important questions, but we thought that it was better if we could capture this with just life on land. So once we had this system, then we felt that now we can start to give this some kind of visualize this in some way. So we started sketching on this, and after about 4 months or something, that's when we landed at this system. So the first thing when we had helped to create this, and it was released in in September of 2015, was why didn't this really take off? It seemed like this was so clear. So the other thing we have to remember then is the question about complexity. And I think that we can say for sure that complexity is good, but it's also hard to understand. All the advances that humanity has done is about increasing complexity in some way. It's obviously what the evolution in itself is, but also the evolution of societies and technologies, etc. So complexity is good, but hard to understand. That's one thing. And the other thing with complexity comes that everything is part of a system. And if everything is part of a system, then understanding these systems becomes completely essential. So when we started to work on the SDGs, on the global goals, we created this symbol to show that these 17 goals were connected in ways, but it felt that people did not quite understand how interconnected this agenda was. It's completely integrated, meaning you can't solve just one question because they're all connected in some way. So we started to think about what is like the DNA of this. And if you think about where we have been very successful in moving forward with our thinking, there's always been some kind of system in place. A good one is, of course, to think about the periodic table. So we were thinking, can we create something like this out of the global goals? So we started to look at the targets. There are 169 targets, and as some kind of a proof of concept, I said, okay, I'm going to take the most hard target, the one that I can't understand, and I'm going to see if I can make that make sense in some way. And that became target 17.6. And 17.6 as a target goes like this. And this is a fairly complex way to describe something that you want people to engage in. And it's a language that is so filled with words. And this is all one sentence. And we started to wonder, how can this possibly be simplified? Well, it turned out that when you read it carefully, you realize that it is about access to science, technology, and innovation. It's also about knowledge sharing, and it's about cooperation. The rest is basically fillers. So I'm not going to say that those words doesn't have a meaning, but when you're going to create powerful communication, it's always good to think about different levels of magnification and where you need to kind of simplify something to have an entry point for people. So 17.6, according to us, became then this: knowledge sharing and cooperation for access to science, technology, and innovation. And this turns out, when you think about it, that is one of the most important targets for the whole agenda. How do we help developing countries with expertise, and how do we make sure that they're not repeating the mistakes that we've done here? So we created then a framework around this. When we had each of these 169 targets get a simple language and a symbol. We find that these symbols are very easy, makes it very easy to remember these. And the result was something like this. Now, if anyone is good at counting quickly, you can see that these are not all the 69, I'm sorry. This is about half of them. But regardless, what we can say for sure is that this is a new periodic table, and it's a periodic table for all the work we have to do for sustainability. So in order to make this a little bit easier to work with, we have created some assets. One of the most popular one is a target finder. And since we have a very strong design background in my company, we were obviously very inspired by color charts. But this is where you can actually go into all of these targets and look at them. So the question then, when people hear about 169 targets, becomes how relevant are these targets to things that we're dealing with? I picked out a few just to illustrate. So for example, target 3.3, fight communicable diseases, seems pretty pertinent right now. 3D, improve early warning systems for global health risks. 3.8, achieve universal health coverage. Support research, development, and universal access to affordable vaccines. It turns out that any question basically that you're discussing, you're going to find targets that defines the work we have ahead. We obviously need social protection systems. We've seen an enormous difference in the world in how this pandemic has affected societies based basically solely on this. Effective, accountable, and transparent institutions are obviously a precondition for that. And then we've also, and obviously public access to information is also essential. Then in the case of a pandemic, you can see what other questions does this affect? Well, we've seen that women has to a much higher degree been have to endure violence and exploitations during this, and this is also true for children. So I think that that's a very illustrative example, and I can give you one more. We've been talking a lot during this pandemic about health, but if you don't have access to sanitation and hygiene, it's very hard to wash your hands. So what we see here is that it's all of these issues are interconnected. And the way you can look at this is to find, if you want to move the system in a particular direction, your central point, then you have to find the issues that surrounds them. And when you find those issues, you can also start to do great collaboration with other people who you might not have been thinking about that they should be part of the mixture. So how do these targets interact then? We did a really exciting project with Stockholm Environment Institute a couple of years ago. They have devised seven graded scales of how these targets are affecting each other. If they work against the one or if they work for another, and to what degree. So we created a visual system for this, where we could start to look at a cross-impact matrix, where we could see sort of study the different interactions between targets in different ways. Now, as you can see, this is not 169 columns or rows. So this was just limited. We used 2 targets per goal, meaning it's 34 times 34. And if you did all the 169, you would be at 28,000 boxes about. So this obviously would have to be a digital system that you do. But the very important part of this is that when you start to add this up, you can get the network influences of the targets. And when you see this, you can see which of the targets are superpowers in this. And granted, this was just using 34 of them, so there's many who hasn't got all of the studies done around them. And also, as you may understand, this is also something that has to be localized depending on the conditions in that community or country. But 16.6 that shoots up there, that is actually strong institutions. And the other targets that have been very important in this study was 12.1, which is about sustainable production and consumption, 8.4, which is about resource efficiency, 5.5, which is about women in leadership positions, and 4.4, which is educating for financial success. So that is basically an example of how important these targets are, the importance of understanding them and remembering that the 17 goals are actually categories, and the real goals that you have to work with are the 169 targets under that. I'm just going to finish by mentioning another aspect of working for sustainability that we have been now working on for a little bit over a year. We started to think about, asking ourselves why change was so hard when it's so important that we get this right. And we realized that it's all about ourselves. It's all about what's driving us. So that was the birthplace of the inner development goals. Which skills do we need? So this is an attempt to map the transformational skills that we need. And where we are right now, I'm not going to go deep into this, but we have defined 23 skills and qualities that helps us. And we've started to build a system out of this when we're looking at what skills comes from being, self-awareness, inner compass, presence, openness, obviously, the only power we really need to be careful with to make sure that everyone have them. And then we have virtues, optimism, appreciation, humility, courage, empathy, compassion, thinking, our cognitive skills, which is really what I feel like a lot of this presentation has been about, complexity awareness and how to think, make sense of things and think long term. And finally, how we relate to the world around us, with how we generate trust, communication skills, co-creation skills, etc. We have a lot of partners for this, and we welcome everyone who's interested in this system. And if you were interested in those targets, you can download it all on our website, thenewdivision.world. And if you have any questions, my email is there too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jacob. It was a very interesting presentation, and I think it's very important to understand that we continue to develop how we are working with the sustainability goals. And I think you presented the next step, and I think that is something that we have learned the lesson, and then we need to move on and think how we are using the sustainability goals. So thank you so much for that presentation, and then I will share again with you. Because now I would like to present the next speaker, and that will be Eve, and she is a senior management working for UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And the title of her presentation is The Role of UN Strengthen Universities' Contribution to the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I will leave the floor to Eve so she can share her presentation, and welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, wherever this finds you. My name is Eve Delamath-Karubi from the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and I'm going to share a little bit about our work and how we support universities to play a role as active stakeholders in delivering on the promise of the 2030 Agenda. So hopefully you all can see my presentation. Good. Just a little bit of background on Sdsn. We are a sort of a hybrid organization that operates with a UN mandate, but we are not a UN institution and we are not funded by the UN. We are fully independent, but we do report and operate under the auspices of the UN Secretary General. We are led by world famous economist, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and our mandate essentially at the beginning was to mobilize expertise from around the world to contribute to the negotiations which led to the Sustainable Development Goals framework. And then once the goals were adopted in 2015 and came into force, our mandate was renewed to support their implementation around the world, continuing to build on this very effective, powerful global network of experts and universities that we had already developed. I'm going to give a little bit of a history lesson because I do think it's worth remembering the complexity of what was called at the time the post-2015 process. I've been with Sdsn since the beginning, so over 8.5 years now, so I was very much involved in these negotiations and this process. And I'm sorry for the quality of the image, it's the only one I have, but if you squint, you can see that Sdsn is this sort of gray line that's parallel, continuing along and supporting the whole process. And we did contribute to the member state negotiations. We collaborated with the high-level panel. We issued a number of expert reports on different thematic topics, but also an overarching report, which was delivered to the Secretary General and was part of his synthesis report that contributed to that final agreement. And I think it's important that, you know, we really understand, well, first of all, how absolutely momentous of a process this was. Very lengthy, deeply consultative, and really allowed for an opportunity to engage with different types of expertise, whether it was academic expertise, corporate, individuals, civil society. There was space for all of these different stakeholders to have a voice and contribute to the process. This is, of course, markedly different from how the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, were developed, which was essentially in a locked basement room of UN headquarters in New York over a couple of weeks period. And I also think it's really important that academia was recognized as an important stakeholder by UN leadership and member states from the beginning. So we ran a number, we had a number of thematic groups that we were working with, all bringing together different experts from around the world to make sure that we were bringing this kind of research-backed expertise into the process. Which of course brought us to the framework we all know today, and the previous presenter gave a really interesting presentation about how we landed at this sort of synthetic vision of the goals. So I'll skip past that and just tell you a little bit about the work that Sdsn does today in order to mobilize our network in support of delivering on these goals. And essentially we have 3 pillars of activity. And I'll say a few words about each one. The first is, of course, our global policy work. The second is our global network of knowledge institutions. And finally, we have our own education program called the Sdg Academy. So on the policy analysis side, Sdsn has led thinking on a number of aspects of the SDGs. Back in the early days, but during the negotiations, we were the first organization to put any consideration or work into what could be a monitoring framework for the SDGs, where we suggested not only a framework, but also suggested specific indicators for the SDGs. And all of this work, again, was really driven by our networks of thematic experts around the world. Since then, we've contributed a lot on SDG implementation with a number of what we call getting started guides, including a guide for getting started with the SDGs in universities, as well as a number of long-term pathways projects, so specifically on decarbonization, as well as land use and agriculture. And a lot of work on data and financing as well. If you're interested in any of those topics, I would just invite you to visit our website and you'll find a lot more detailed information and publications available there. But many of you will also know our flagship report, which used to be called the SDG Index and Dashboards Report and has been rebranded as the Sustainable Development Report. In the global report, we've selected a number of indicators for which data is available today to take a snapshot view of where countries stand with regards to achieving the SDGs. We do rank countries, and we also are able to analyze trends to see whether or not countries are actually on track or not. Spoiler alert, they are not. We have also developed regional and subnational editions of these reports. So the Africa report, we published in Arab region, Europe, and Latin America, as well as subnational editions. So these are comparing cities or states within regions, and these are done in collaboration with the networks, which I'll talk about next. But I also wanted to share information about the COVID-19 Commission that we are hosting under the auspices of the Lancet. This is an interdisciplinary commission focusing on recovering and finding lasting solutions to the pandemic that the world is still facing. Talking not only about the epidemiology and solutions to suppress the pandemic, but also to address the humanitarian and economic crises and identifying solutions to build forward better, as we're saying these days. A few words about our networks, for which we have pretty good global coverage. We have 42 national and regional level networks all around the world. The yellow ones on this map are our national networks. The blue are where we have regional networks. And of course, blue and yellow combined make green. And so those are the countries where we have an overlap of both national and regional networks. At the global level, the networks program really focuses on a number of topics, but since our network of now 1,500 universities and research centers around the world, we're supporting them in thinking about the necessary transformation that universities have to undergo. So I mentioned that one of our getting started guides was specifically for universities, for them to find their role and appropriate the goals. This is sort of a follow-up guide that we launched last year on accelerating education for the SDGs in universities. And the idea really is to continue to inspire and empower universities and higher education institutions to take ownership of the goals and provide their students of all different levels with the right knowledge and skills and mindsets to be able to contribute to the goals. And of course, by offering very practical approaches, guidance, and resources. All of that's in our guide. One of the things that I particularly enjoy about this guide is that it is accompanied by a website of case studies. We have over 50 case studies on the website on these different aspects of university engagement in the SDGs. So beyond, obviously, the very important learning and teaching aspect, but also beyond the classroom, and also thinking about campuses and university processes and that kind of thing. And in fact, we've just concluded a new call for case studies. We're going to be updating this database and bringing in even more. So I would invite you to also have a look at this report, but also make sure you revisit it in a few months when we launch the new set of case studies. The networks themselves are hosted by universities at the national and regional level. And their missions are to localize and mobilize support for the SDGs. This can mean, translating what these global goals really mean at the national level. If you just take goal 1 on no poverty, of course, poverty eradication in France, where I am today, looks very different from the needs for poverty eradication in Kenya, for example. And so we need to sort of translate these goals and understand what they mean in different national contexts. And this can be expert research papers, it can be consultations with government, it can also include a lot of awareness raising work that our networks are doing. Of course, central to the mission, of course, of our host institutions and our membership is teaching. And so we work with our networks to improve and develop their teaching for sustainable development. And we also encourage them to identify solutions which exist in their universities, or also to develop new ones. And we include under this what we call our long-term pathways work. So that means starting from an end goal of, for instance, net zero emissions by 2040, how do you work backwards and actually come up with viable pathways that are viable technologically, economically, and sociologically? And so that's the kind of research that they're engaging with on their own in their own national and regional contexts, but also by connecting with each other and with the policy teams at Sdsn as well. In addition to these geographic networks, we also have a number of very dynamic thematic networks. These were really the core of Sdsn in the early days, but as we transitioned to an organization that was there to support a global sort of thematic debate, to an organization that was supporting implementation, which of course happens much more at the national level. The focus shifted a little bit away from these networks, and the ones that remained are really the ones where there seemed to be a real gap and a real need to bring the global expert community together to propose very specific solutions. And so here you just have a quick snapshot of some of the publications that these thematic networks have developed in the past couple of years. And just to share some examples about what this work actually looks like. One of my favorite examples, because it really does link the policy work to the networks, is our network in Malaysia took the SDG Index report results. These are presented as a dashboard with a color coding, red being very off track, orange, yellow, sort of progressively up to green, meaning that the goal is achieved or on track to be achieved. And this was about 2 years ago. At the time, Malaysia had 3 goals which were red, and so the university network there really sort of wanted to take ownership and understand why Malaysia was performing so poorly on these goals and what they could do about it. And it turned out, so one of these goals was goal number 2, and it turned out that the sort of underlying reason why that goal in particular was red was due to child malnutrition. And this was not an issue that was at all a political priority, or frankly, even something that people were generally aware of as a crisis that Malaysia was facing. And so the network engaged in research in a number of different regions in the country, and published a series of policy papers making very specific recommendations for policies to put in place, and delivered those to the office of the Prime Minister in Malaysia. So thanks to this data analysis work that we do at the global level, localized in Malaysia through the expert network to ultimately make a policy change. And I really think that that's a really great way of encapsulating what SDSN does and how we're really trying to empower universities to mobilize their expertise to contribute to achieving the SDGs. I have a number of other examples here. The last one I'll cite also is on the education and teaching side. A number of our networks run summer schools, for example, but we also, of course, working with universities, don't want to neglect the largest population on any university campus, which is, of course, students. And we have a whole wing of SDSN called Sdsn Youth, which is dedicated not only to working with students, but young people generally, to empower them to become actors in their own future as well. And Sdsn Youth today has really a huge number of programs, initiatives for any young person. So the SDG Students Program is the opportunity for university students, but they offer fellowships. They have a solutions program for youth entrepreneurs. They have a youth leadership program, which is sponsored with the Vatican. And they have the Global Schools Program, which has developed curricula with professors from Harvard on K through 12. To educate children on the SDGs and empower them with that knowledge. And finally, I will wrap up with the third, but certainly not least, pillar of what SDSN does at the global level, still very much related to our core mission of supporting SDG implementation with this particular angle of working with universities. We have our own online academy called the Sdg Academy, which creates its own content. So we have about 35 massive open online courses, which we have developed with leading professors and researchers from around the world on essentially all topics relating to the SDGs. So we have courses on climate, biodiversity, oceans, early childhood education, land use, you name it, it's there. It's a very unique offering, and really with a top-notch global faculty, and it's of course all entirely free as well. But the Sdg Academy is more than just these massive open online courses. They've actually taken all of these courses and put them into what they call the Sdg Academy library, where they have taken all the individual video lectures from all of their courses and tagged them by topic and by goal. So you have this searchable library. Instead of following a whole course, you can also just find individual lectures on this topic. We've launched now our own fully online Masters in Sustainable Development with University College Dublin and Sunway University in Malaysia. We also host the Masters in Development Practice, which is a global association of 34 universities that share a master's degree curriculum. We have a partnership with selected SDSN members to give them special support to build capacity and support faculty to improve sustainable development teaching on campuses. A huge community of practice where professors from around the world work together to share best practices and opportunities for research and thought leadership. And then finally, we will soon be launching with the Office of the Secretary General a new program called Mission 4.7. This refers to goal number 4, target number 7, which is on education for sustainable development, which is a real priority to accelerate in the coming years. So I will wrap up there, and thank you all for your kind attention. Invite you, of course, to visit our website, unsdsn.org, where you can access all of those publications, learn more about our programs, and feel free to email me if you have any questions, though I hope to also address them in the panel debate. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. It was so interesting to hear about all the work that you are doing, and also to get a better understanding how you're working with different stakeholders, and that you are working very closely with the university. So this will be very interesting how we can connect with different kinds of networks, also like ISCN network. So thank you so very much, Eve. And then we will go to the next speaker. I will just share the screen. And the next speaker will be David Board, and he's the Secretary General of CESAER. And CESAER is an international association of the universities of science and technology in Europe. And his title on the presentation is Universities' Holistic Approach, Role of Strategic University Intelligence in Contribution of Universities to an Ecological, Economic, and Social Sustainability. So then, David, I give the floor to you, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much indeed, dear Christina, and a warm welcome also from my side to all the participants from around the world. Thank you very much, particularly also to EPFL Lausanne as a joint and prominent member of both CESAER and ISCN. As you might know, ISCN and CESAER have concluded a partnership about a year ago. And this opportunity is wonderful to speak to you and present some of the work that we have been doing so far together. I'll address 3 points. Who are we? What do we do about the contribution of universities to sustainability, and why is strategic university intelligence so important when measuring such contribution? When it comes to the first, so we're an international association that's introduced by Christina. We are about 30 years old. We're an acknowledged stakeholder organization focusing on advocacy with regards to European policies and funding programs in the areas of research, innovation, and education. We unite 53 universities of science and technology in 26 countries. Leading research-intensive universities with a strong STEM profile, strongly rooted in engineering. And I think when reflecting about the role or the contribution to sustainability, it's important to go back in history. So universities of science and their science and technology bring science to homes. They help discover and release treasures of the earth. They boost military capacity of nations. They advance industrialization. They help conquer nature, determine wars, and help rebuild societies afterwards. And obviously, for decades, we have been optimizing combustion engines. From a European perspective, dear colleagues, as of the Lisbon Agenda concluded by the European Council in 2000, we can speak of an understanding of a competitiveness paradigm where universities are supposed to create jobs and boost economic growth along a so-called triple helix, whereby state, business, industry, and academia collaborate around innovation, research, and education. More recently, a fourth dimension was added here, citizens, and that is obviously for some reason, because as you're aware, currently with the pandemic, universities of science and technology, such as my members, are expected to help recover economies, but also to build resilience to help tackling climate change and actually any other local and global challenges, such as the loss of biodiversity that loom behind the current pandemic. There are many of them, such as plastic pollution. In the end, I think there is a crucial role and understanding of the role of such universities as my members to prevent planet Earth turning into a hothouse. And that was kind of a realization also with our board and our association. And so a couple of years ago, we sort of started thinking about this Kuhnian paradigm shift that is needed to help realize this most important agenda that has been so eloquently introduced to you, being the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are some ingredients that we are looking into, such as the Anthropocene Weltanschauung, the need for great transformation, the role of ethics and values, the multi-stakeholder approach, and importantly, the idea of an agency. So based on this understanding at our governing bodies, we sort of turned a couple of years ago towards investigating the contributions of our members to sustainability. And we work with biannual work plans. So our current biannual work plan works around 4 major work packages. One is to start off with, how do we actually measure things? And this is the very topic here today, where we also have a strong collaboration with ISCN. In the end, we see our role also in terms of inspiring the university leadership of our members and beyond on their role. And we are envisaging to publish a declaration, including concrete pledges by our rectors and presidents to this agenda. And if you wrap it all together, our 1,200 volunteers and leaders basically work under the current work plan 2021 to help shaping sustainable knowledge societies in Europe and beyond. As I introduced already with you earlier, we have some strategic partnerships where we collaborate with ISCN when it comes to measuring. We have a couple of events coming on, notably a symposium, Science for Net Zero Transition, as a fringe event to the COP26, where we work together with ISCN and Science Europe, which is the umbrella organizations of research, performing and funding organizations in Europe, towards a goal of bringing, let's say, a systems engineering approach from the local to the global level. When it comes to this work package number 1, measuring, it was interesting to see, I think, the departure that we had together with the colleagues, Alexander and Nebel, notably, and Christina, was some hesitance about what is actually mentioned in terms of the rankers, and notably the Times Higher Education University Impact Ranking. So we sort of departed with a notion, why or how could we influence them to better collect data that would help universities as well. And throughout many discussions we had with Elsevier, with QS and Times and other networks such as the Aurora network, we basically came to the conclusion we need to move away from an influencing rankers approach to what I would call the strategic university intelligence idea. You see my colleagues from Aalborg, UCD, NTNU, Surrey, and Strathclyde, and my dear colleague Mats Nygaard will lead the discussion that we have later on here today. I think, and part of all of that has been sort of put already in the invitation in terms of a holistic approach that we try to take. So we're actually not working with case studies. We're not working with a collection of data and analysis on what our members do. It was kindly introduced by Sdsn, but also ISCN have done so very much. So we're rather looking into a sort of a conceptual approach here, trying to summarize in very few pages triggers and inspiration to university leaders. And so obviously we depart from the mission of universities of science and technology. So we start as research intensive universities. How does science and technology contribute in terms of the direct contribution to policy and decision making, geo observation feeding into IPCC reports, direct contributions of certain specific disciplinary areas, obviously environmental sciences, but also indirect contributions to sustainability, such as mathematics, developing algorithms to help simulation and modeling. The same is true for learning and teaching, direct contributions, interesting there, challenge-based approaches, vertically integrated projects, another approach quite prominent amongst our members, but as introduced by the colleagues from Sdn, dedicated degree programs, both with regards to sustainability, but also in terms of direct contribution of, for example, studying environmental sciences. A next line of thinking in the field of learning and teaching, I think, is integrating the UN SDG and sustainability in the curricula, transversal skills and competences. In the field of innovation, it's about moving away from traditional industry, academia collaboration into ecosystems and beyond, the idea of shaping markets to promote common goods, but also fostering innovators. And all of that, of course, has different modes, from collegiate roles in the local and national context to cooperation with partners worldwide, sustainable campus management, and obviously a special interest on the contribution to the UN SDG number 17. When moving to conclusions, I think we're currently sort of identifying the rapid developments around key technologies and how they're applied as a key aspect, the need to link the social sciences and humanities with STEM, systems thinking, it was introduced earlier, systems engineering approach, the importance of openness of research, education, innovation, key role of infrastructure, but also a special responsibility amongst our members when it comes to UN SDG 5, university leadership and values and frameworks, all of that to culminate in our declaration and white paper later this year. I come to my third and last point, dear colleagues. Why is such strategic university intelligence important when measuring the contribution? It's interesting to look at the triggers, and I think many would agree that the main trigger word is students and learners' expectations on university leadership, but also in terms of funders, more complex expectations, a trend from performance to impact. But as I mentioned, the digitalization and rapidly emerging technologies and the lack of understanding of politicians around them, different geopolitical world order, but most importantly, the different and tremendous local and global challenges out there. When looking at all of that with the task force benchmark, we sort of found that the key performance indicators as introduced through new public management end 80s, beginning of the 90s, actually fall short, and that we needed to move from traditional over next generation to progressive metrics. I kindly invite you to have a look at our white paper there. And obviously, all of this sort of culminated in the emergence of corresponding rankings, such as the university impact rankings. But what are we actually measuring and why? Maybe two sort of axes, process result, internal, external, and obviously it started off with building reputation, engaged stakeholder, particularly student recruitment, the idea of more impact in terms of help tackling local and global challenges. But from a university perspective, it's very often about excelling in science and technology, learning and teaching, and to promote the agency of the people involved. Last but not least, it's often about realizing institutional development strategies and benchmarking against others. With that, the focus shifts away from influencing rankers to a university-centric perspective and brings us into the idea of an evolving idea of a university over time, as I introduced at the very beginning of my speech. And maybe the most important thing here is that such strategic university intelligence can empower institutions to reach unprecedented forces to act as autonomous agents of great transformations. And you see a whole list of things that might belong to such an evolving idea. From this perspective, and to just give you some examples, you might want to ask some questions that are relevant. And, you know, like, what is the role of the leadership in the cultural change? What mechanisms does an institution have to assess and reward contribution? But also tricky questions. How do we safeguard and live scientific integrity, academic freedom, and institutional autonomy? Obviously, such questions cannot be answered by traditional metrics such as, you know, number of patents being involved. So I think we are here now at the stage, at least in our context, where we ask ourselves some tricky questions. Why do universities collect data and, you know, deliver them for free to commercial third parties? Why do they develop these algorithms and machine learning competence and deliver them for free? Why do they pay to get insights into their reputation, impact, and performance? Why do they pay to be able to benchmark against others? Concluding, this is part one, I would argue, of a joint collaboration in terms of a deliverable that we have together with the dear colleagues from ISCN. If you thought this was interesting, or you think someone else might find this interesting, you may wish to consider saving the dates for a joint workshop where we look more in how to improve this play around measuring, maybe provide some answers on the questions on the last slide, but certainly also the symposium Science for Net Zero Transition, kindly hosted by the colleagues of Streetlight. And therewith, I thank you very much for your attention, and I hand back. Let's check whether there are any questions.
Thanks. It was very interesting, and to see the way you have worked and developed issues concerning sustainability in your network. And we do a lot of good work together. I really appreciate that. And I think we will have this ongoing discussion. What are we measuring and why? And also, if you look at the world rankings of university, that is also a way where you have for a long time measuring universities concerning reputation and etc. And I think we also need to look at that. Is that a way that is suitable nowadays? And we're looking at how we should measure sustainability. I think then we also need to think about the world rankings also. So I think it will be improved, and I can hear what the other describe in their presentation. So I think we will move this further on. And now I think it's time for our break. And I hope that I will see you all again 4 o'clock. And then we will have a lot of energy, and we will have some more coffee and water. And then we will have this panel debate led by Mats. Okay, see you soon. Bye. Okay, hi everyone. I think the time is 4 o'clock and that we should start again. And before we have this panel debate, I would like to welcome and to invite Megan, and she's going to have her presentation. And she is the Executive Director for the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. And she has the title of her presentation, Method for Measuring Contribution of Universities to Sustainability. So I will leave the floor to Megan, and I will stop share.
Thank you, Christina, and greetings everyone from Philadelphia, where it's morning, but hope you all are healthy and safe wherever you are. It's always nice to be connecting with sustainability change agents, especially as the past year and a half have been incredibly challenging. So I've been asked to talk with you all today about STARS, one of AISHE's primary programs. Let me just pull up my slides here. First of all, I want to give you a very quick overview of who I am and what we do. I'm the Executive Director of AISHE, as Christina mentioned. AISHE is the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. We're a network similar to ISCN and others represented here today. Our mission is to inspire and catalyze higher education to lead the global sustainability transformation. We're about 16 years old, and one of the programs that we are most widely recognized for is our STARS program. STARS is the Sustainability Tracking, Assessment, and Rating System, and it's a transparent self-reporting framework for colleges and universities to measure their sustainability performance. So a little bit of background here. About 16 years ago, we had many colleagues that were basically directors of sustainability faculty, even some students that collectively were saying we need a consistent way to measure sustainability in higher education. And given the fact that AISHE, we have plenty of resources, a resource hub with about thousands of resources for campus sustainability folks, but we didn't have a consistent way to measure sustainability in higher education. So AISHE was tasked with coming up with a consistent and comprehensive way to measure sustainability in higher education. And that's really how STARS was born all those 16 years ago. So STARS is a system that was created by higher education as well as it's directly for higher education. It's relevant to all institution types and contexts. It's shaped by participants and it's open and has an inclusive governance structure. And the image here basically shares the sort of the left side boxes are all the different ways that we collect feedback on the STARS system that feeds into our staff that work directly on STARS, who then works with our technical committees of our AISHE Advisory Council, as well as the STARS Steering Committee to put out a new version. So while we've been developing STARS, or really while we've been working on STARS for 16 years, I would say it's on a path of continuous improvement. So currently the most recent version is STARS 2.2. So we've had various iterations of STARS as we continue to try to improve the system as well as raise the bar around expectations of performance for sustainability within colleges and universities. So why would people participate in STARS? And similar to sort of the questions we were just talking about in the previous presentation, even like why are we measuring these pieces? Well, first of all, of course, it's nice to gain positive recognition for your sustainability efforts on your campuses, for sure. But I would say it's arguably even that much more important for institutions that are creating a baseline for how they can continue to improve on an ongoing basis. In addition, STARS helps to build a culture of sustainability on campus. Given the fact that it's so comprehensive, there are people throughout the entire campus that are involved in the data collection process. And as one of my colleagues used to say when he was the first director of sustainability at an institution in Washington, D.C., and reported directly to the president said, make us green. Those were basically the marching orders. And essentially that was right when STARS launched, and that director of sustainability was like, well, now I have an agenda for every single department on campus. So it really is a collaborative process, and can be a collaborative process to build that culture of sustainability. And through that process, of course, generating new ideas, STARS has helped to inform strategic planning and budgeting process for massive institutions, as well as, of course, making real progress towards sustainability. So how is it structured? STARS is divided up into these 5 categories. And within these 5 categories, there are subcategories. So AC here on the left-hand corner is academics, with the subcategories curriculum and research. Then we have operations in green, and engagement, planning and administration, and innovation on the right-hand side of the screen. And all of those topics listed are the subcategories of STARS. Underneath each subcategory, there are different credits, and each credit can get you points. And essentially the more points you get, the higher level of a score that you get. And the recognition level here, platinum, gold, silver, bronze, and reporter, I would say that institutions, these are what we call the rating seals. Institutions, of course, want to continue to improve. Several institutions that perhaps start out at STARS Silver, they get the taste for success and they want to be able to pursue STARS Gold and Platinum. But other institutions actually opt to be a STARS reporter, and that's the seal on the left-hand side of your screen. And what that means is essentially an institution that is publicly reporting their data, their sustainability data, but not pursuing any points. And the reason for that is we wanted to make sure, number one, that there were no barriers to participation in STARS. We wanted anyone to be able to participate, any institution of higher education, and felt that, yes, while STARS is comprehensive, it also is admittedly a lot of work. And we didn't want institutions to say, we're not even going to do that because it's too much. We wanted institutions to feel like they could start out small and perhaps work up to a score. So the STARS reporter option would allow for institutions to say, maybe only submit operational data, for example, or just submit a few different credits so that they're being transparent about their data. And then again, the bronze, silver, gold, and platinum ratings, it depends on how many points the institution has achieved that will determine their rating. So that's the public recognition side of STARS. And again, as I mentioned, eligibility and access was really important to us. Again, 16 years ago, in the beginning stages of STARS, we had a pilot process that was primarily focused in the US and Canada, but we've expanded international participation over the past decade. And again, we wanted to make sure that there were entry points for any institution. So as such, we have a free version of the STARS tool, and then we have a paid version of the STARS tool. As you can imagine, there's a bit more bells and whistles with the paid version, and that basically the full access to the STARS system is basically how you would earn a rating and get access to the STARS reporting tool and all the ways that you can actually submit data. So essentially the paid subscription gets you access to this online reporting tool that enables institutions to continually update their data, manage their data before they're ready to publicly submit. But again, anyone can participate. There is a basic access that is available for free and is allowed for a lot of institutions to, again, start reporting on their sustainability data. So because the STARS process can be cumbersome and there's any number of variables that would determine how long the STARS process takes. For example, if an institution has a team of sustainability staff that has already done a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, perhaps you've already done an inventory of your academics catalog. There's so many different variables that would determine how quickly or how easily the STARS process would go for you. But because it can be cumbersome, we didn't want institutions to have to go through that process on an annual basis. So essentially the STARS report and the rating that an institution achieves, that is valid for 3 years. After 3 years, it would expire. However, despite that 3-year of access to the valid rating, you also have the opportunity to update your data through the STARS reporting tool and pay for an annual subscription. And I often say that, I mean, I don't know about you all, but I wouldn't necessarily be able to do my best work if I only did a project once every 3 years. So the annual access really helps to have institutions stay on top of their data collection, be able to update their data as needed, et cetera. And I did just want to note here that annual deadlines exist. We have a sustainable campus index that I'll mention in a few minutes about that ranks institutions, as well as within North America. There's a couple of other rankings that come out that we have data sharing relationships with. And the idea being that I would rather have institutions and staff focused on doing amazing sustainability programming than trying to figure out how to submit data to all these different organizations. So STARS has actually been sort of now, it has become sort of the go-to place for different other entities to get data to rank institutions on sustainability. And I'm hopeful that's the case for a couple of other systems, and I'll mention that in just a minute. As I mentioned previously, I just wanted to make sure that everybody, for those of you that are unfamiliar with STARS, you can go to our website, and the technical manual, which is everything you would ever need to know about STARS, is publicly available for free. We wanted to make sure that you could answer any questions that you had around STARS, that you could do some reading, take a look at our website, and be able to have access to that information before you pay to participate. So everything you would ever need to know is in the technical manual. We also have plenty of other sources of information and data for you all. And I'll share that benchmarking is one of the, I'd say, benefits of participating, and what a lot of our institutions really find most valuable about participating. To be able to access the data displays that we have, as well as benchmarking tools, enables you to understand how you're doing compared to your peers. Not that higher education is a competitive place, I say jokingly, but I think the benchmarking tool is enabling institutions to understand how they're doing, again, compared to their peers, and trying to even identify other institutions they could reach out to with questions or for some support. So a lot of today has been, focused on talking about holistic approaches to sustainability. And I think STARS, that's really what we started out to achieve, is a holistic approach to measuring sustainability in higher education. And while we started all those 16 years ago, we're currently over 1,000 institutions of higher education participating across 44 countries. And while that's super exciting to me, especially given the fact I've been at ASHE for so long now, 12 years, it's really awesome to see our program has taken up and provided so much value. But I would also say that from the beginning of ASHE's existence, as well as STARS, our goal was thinking broadly and deeply about sustainability. So for example, equity and social justice were baked into our view and the STARS program even 16 years ago when we started the development. And it made some interesting conversations within institutions of higher education even a decade ago that were saying, well, why is diversity and affordability included in this sustainability rating system? And that's because unfortunately still so many folks hear the term sustainability and misinterpret that to mean the operational lens of sustainability or just an environmental lens. Whereas ASHE set out years ago and continue to try and prioritize centering racial equity and social justice in everything that we do. And STARS is certainly included in that. Again, as I mentioned, STARS is on a path of continuous improvement. So we're really, really hoping that that confusion, or I'll say sort of perhaps misinterpretation of STARS and sustainability rather, becomes a thing of the past. And frankly, I think the Sustainable Development Goals have done such a phenomenal job at educating on the breadth and depth of sustainability. So that's been really heartening to see. And a few years ago, obviously after the SDGs launched, STARS had been around for many years at that point, and we were like, okay, how do we make sure that institutions of higher education understand that they have a role with, if not a responsibility toward advancing the SDGs? So we came up with a publication that's again readily available on our website called STARS Aligned, and it basically aligns the STARS system, our credits, the subcategories, and all the detail of STARS with the different aspects of the SDGs and all of the targets, et cetera. So it's a way of helping campuses, especially those 1,000 plus campuses that are using STARS across the country. It's a way for them to understand how they're having a larger impact beyond just their campus. And I think, as some of my colleagues here already mentioned, it's so critically important that higher education institutions understand the critical role and responsibility they have in advancing the SDGs. And with so many campuses, again, having already used STARS, it was such a great way to garner more enthusiasm, support, and really, I would say sort of a collective ambition to advancing the SDGs, to have this alignment. So the current version of STARS, STARS version 2.2, every single credit aligns with the relevant sustainable development goals, which was just such an important part of us. And again, making sure that STARS was relevant to a global audience. So given the fact that STARS has been around for 16 years, and yes, we've been on a path of continuous improvement, I did just want to note that there are only 10 STARS Platinum institutions. And I mean, there's a number of different meanings that we could make of this, but I guess the point that I wanted to share with you all today, as we're thinking about holistic sustainability and understanding new different tools such as STARS, the fact that there are only 10 institutions that have achieved STARS Platinum, I do think speaks to needing institutional leadership support, needing institutional funding for sustainability initiatives, as well as having, and David spoke about this, a culture of sustainability on campus. And I'm so glad that the garbage truck finally just went away. I hope that wasn't too disruptive to all of you listening to me. But having a culture of sustainability on campus, I think, frankly, is one of the common threads of these STARS Platinum institutions. And it's not to say that if you're not a STARS Platinum institution, you don't have a culture of sustainability on your campus. But I think that in particular is one of the key themes, in addition to the fact that there's institutional support, budget support, and likely a number of other attributes that all of these institutions have in common. But I do think it's just important for us to note that, and it speaks to sort of the rigor of the STARS system, that there's only 10 STARS Platinum institutions, despite the system being out for over 10 years at this point. And all of the STARS reports, all of the data that each of these institutions have posted is publicly available. So all of you can go check that out and see if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how each of these institutions actually accomplished the STARS Platinum rating. And similarly, I mentioned this previously, but each year we put out what's called the Sustainable Campus Index. And initially we were a bit hesitant to do a ranking, I'll admit that, because I think from ASHE's perspective, we've supported over 1,000 campuses for the past 16 plus years. We want our institutions and our members to be have a positive association with us. And we didn't feel good about saying, here's the best, here's the worst. However, after so many years of having STARS be the rating system, which again, with the precious metals as the rating seals, we felt that it was important to identify within each of the impact areas of STARS, who's doing the best and how do we best learn from those examples to be able to have more campuses achieving more sustainability impact. So the Sustainable Campus Index is a great reference point. And in addition to highlighting top performers by impact area and overall top performers, there's also institutional highlights that I think really shed some light on the nuance of how campuses are basically embracing sustainability, helping to educate and engage students. I think one of our other colleagues, Eve, spoke about that, the importance of student engagement. And frankly, I think engaging students throughout the STARS process has been transformative for so many campuses. There are campuses that have created courses around the STARS process, like doing a sustainability assessment on their campus. And I know as a former student activist, I would have absolutely loved the opportunity to have done that had I been on the opportunity to do so. So I actually want to break from the mold here and move away because the next couple of slides, it's going to be so much easier to show you all on the website. So I wanted to share with you all the fact that, again, STARS has been around for a while now. And there's been several sort of studies about, sustainability assessment and reporting in higher education. So on our website, there is a few different references essentially to where STARS has appeared in academic literature. And this would have just been like way too wordy for a slide, but I just wanted to highlight it for you all, recognizing that there are faculty and researchers participating in this conference, and that as we're doing on this panel even today, trying to evaluate and improve sustainability reporting in higher education and advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. I just wanted to point you all to these studies that I think can be really informative, and they go back as far as I think 2011 and as recent as 2021. And the other piece that I wanted to share, still sharing my screen as opposed to slides, is that we all know that there are many tools out there for campuses to help measure and report on their sustainability performance. And given the fact that so many campuses were using STARS, but then obviously with Times Higher Ed's impact rankings, with the UI Green Metric World University rankings, we wanted to put together something so that institutions had an understanding of the similarities of these systems, as well as some of the differences. And this table here has been, I'll say, vetted and reviewed by our colleagues at Times Higher Ed and UI Green Metric. And it does just sort of talk you through a little bit of, again, sort of the similarities, the differences, and especially as if you're an institution wondering like, well, what can I do to take my institution to the next level? Or perhaps you're wondering, what's a good starting point for me? This might be a really helpful reference point for you. Again, I'm not going to go through the whole piece, but I just wanted to tee this up for you all because I think it is going to be really helpful, again, in understanding sort of the landscape of sustainability reporting in higher education. Okay, so jumping back over to slides just for a couple, another moment or two here. I wanted to just mention very briefly the impact of STARS and share, quite frankly, that actually it's a little bit tricky to talk with you about the impact and to specifically say, oh, this change here or this impact happened directly as a result of STARS. What we hear is a lot of anecdotal evidence, as well as like, sort of qualitative evidence around how sustainability is now, the breadth and depth of sustainability is understood much more deeply as a result of going through the STARS process. We have not just sort of these case studies around how the entire campus has been engaged, but I think how STARS and the achievement of a STARS rating has created a positive impression of sustainability in higher education. I think a lot of folks on campuses start to like worry about, uh-oh, here comes like the sustainability police. But the STARS process, and even one of our colleagues who's, I think, speaking at this conference, Keenat Howitt from Emory, they achieved a STARS Gold rating. They invited everyone who had any hand in the STARS process, data collection, any sort of role. They probably 100 people. They had a big cake to celebrate, and suddenly all these people were involved in a positive piece of celebrating and contributing to advancing sustainability on their campus. So truly, this collaborative nature of STARS has had, I think, ripples effects that have just generated so much impact. And of course, policies have changed, practices have changed, curriculum has evolved. And the other piece is that the private sector has also evolved their policies and practices as a result of STARS, because so many companies are working with campuses. Now campuses are saying, you need to meet these STARS requirements. So finally, I just wanted to say that, recognizing that this is probably new for all of you, we wanted to offer a discount for ISCN members in the ISCN community here today, 50% off participating through STARS through the end of this year using this code ISCN 2021. And I'll also follow up afterwards with more information if anybody has any questions. But I think that's it. Here's our website as well as email. Feel free to email us with any questions. And thank you all for your time this morning.
Thank you, Megan. It was a very interesting presentation, and I think this will be a great contribution to our discussion about why we are measuring and what we should measure. I think that is an ongoing discussion all the time, and we have different tools. So also, you have a lot of experience. STARS has been here for a long time, so thank you so much for sharing that with us. And then I will share begin my presentation. And then we will have the next speaker that I would like to invite and also welcome, and that is Paul Cross. He is an expert in institutional research at ETH Zurich, Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. And the title he has is Sharing Higher Education Institution Sustainability Data, the Perspective of an International Working Group of Universities. So welcome, and I will leave the floor to you, Paul.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Christina. I'll just try and share my screen now and hopefully share the right one. Okay, super. So hopefully you can all see my screen and the presentation. So my name is Paul Cross. I'm calling from Zurich at the moment. The ETH Zurich is one of the federal technical universities in Switzerland, the other being the EPF Lausanne, so the hosts of the ISCN. And the goal for my talk today is to really just share the experiences of a working group that I've been involved in over the last year and a half. And it's been helping me and hopefully colleagues involved in it to get to grips with how HEIs do engage with the SDGs. And I should also point out that I have participated in a few events previously through CESAER and also through the ISCN itself, so maybe a couple of the slides might be familiar to you. Right. So just at a very quick glance to let you know a little bit about where I'm coming from. So as I mentioned, I'm from the ETH Zurich. There are some facts there. And as you can see in the bottom left, we've got the strategic focus areas of the university, and responsibility and sustainability is clearly one of those. And that's the case for many universities at the moment. Now, the university is it's very well renowned. So in the QS rankings, for example, we were 6th, and it's certainly a privilege to work here. Now, my role is that I'm within the institutional research team. And so I think everybody watching will be familiar with that, but that's basically so the business intelligence for the university's administration. So we gather data from across the very complex organization and provide it to our management in the form of management reporting, planning, etc., as well as statutory returns. And my role is coordinating with the ranking agencies. So my perspective is more from, say, a benchmarking point of view rather than, say, the sustainability itself. Although through my work in the working group, I've learned a huge amount around sustainability. So, and in terms of ETH and its sustainability work, this is just really background, but to say that we also have quite a long pedigree in this area. So going back to 1987 with the founding of the Department for Environmental System Sciences, the first university in Europe, we are now recognized as an international center of excellence for sustainable research and teaching. And we do have an office for sustainability, which has been in place since 2008, but part of the President's Office. And we have our core areas of sustainability there, and there are links to our website, for example, if you're interested in learning more about those. And that we've been doing sustainability reporting since 2002. And this is relevant because going through the process of creating the reporting has allowed us to build up quite a sophisticated, say, data gathering and interpretation and consultation process. And that is done to, for example, the Global Reporting Initiative standards. And more recently, we released a sustainability course catalog. So that's our ETH sustainability course catalog through the framework of the UN SDGs. And I think that's also pretty common at the moment. So in terms of the working group that I'm talking about, I'll go back to the very beginning. So in early 2020, 22 universities joined together to really talk about their engagement with the Times Higher Education Impact Ranking. And so that was a combination of members from the ISCN, as well as a smaller working group called BenchTech. And that's more of an informal network of benchmarking institutional research professionals from around the world. And we wanted to get together to just understand, well, what was this new ranking? What does it all mean for us? And how can we use it? And how are people using it? And so we conducted a survey. And I should mention just at the start that ETH Zurich doesn't participate in the impact rankings, and not everybody in the working group did at that time and still don't. So the key findings, as we found them towards the middle of last year, were that of the 22 universities, 40% had participated in the original round. That then rose to 65% in 2020 and a planned 75% in 2021. So we could already see, even within this little group, that it was gaining a lot of traction. Institutions that did participate were finding that there were 3 to 6 weeks estimated effort for submission, and that was very variable. So if you were coming at it, say, fresh as an institution and really wanted to build up your benchmarking or reporting from scratch, then there's a huge amount of effort involved in that and a lot of consultation. But if institutions did have existing mechanisms or tools, they were able to reuse those. So the burden of submission was an issue and probably is still for some institutions of participating, and that would be similar for any ranking. So whether it's the stars rating, etc. And the main reasons for participation at the time were, the sorts of things that Megan has mentioned in her talk around her stars rating from Asia. It's improving the learning around the institution of what they do. It's providing you a platform for international benchmarking. Whereas on the other side, the reasons the institutions were not participating was around the resource requirements and the method concerns. And the method concerns were there because it was a very new ranking at the time. So I think it was launched in around 2019, and it was evolving very quickly. And so when we were taking a look at it, originally from the ETH Zurich perspective, we were thinking, well, that doesn't really measure what we think are important. And through this working group, we collected some of those concerns and fed those back to the Times Higher Education. And Times Higher Education has been iterating that. They've been very open about that. They've been evolving the methodology. So as I mentioned the point already, if you already have a sustainability in place, then that helps you to reuse data probably for some of these rankings. What was most interesting at the time for me was around the different participation strategies that institutions have. So some universities went in and said, well, we want to participate in the impact ranking. We just want to see how we do across the board in as many areas as we can. While others were a bit more targeted, and they said, at this point in time, we just want to look at 3 or 4 specific SDGs, and we'll just limit ourselves to those. And others then took an even more strategic approach maybe and said, well, the main thing we want to get out of this is marketing. And so therefore we will just submit our strongest SDGs and hope to optimize our overall rank. And actually just looking at this small sample of institutions, the 22 or so, the ones that did participate that adopted that strategy seemed to do slightly better in the overall ranking. And then the point in bold here at the bottom was that 3/4 of the group indicated they were very willing to share their submission data more widely. And so at the time, this really struck us as being very important. And for similar reasons that David has mentioned previously, we do, as institutions, invest a lot of time submitting data to various bodies, including the ranking agencies, and some of that then gets to some extent locked away, or it's taken, we get some results out of it in the form of rankings, and then we have to pay to get broader insights into that. And so we wanted to explore that a bit further. So we took the decision in early 2021. The survey was completed. There were some engagement activities, which I'll talk about in the future, to take a status check and say, well, what do we want to do? How do we want to move on to next? And we thought we would continue the collaboration, as it was proving very useful in terms of learning experiences for the participants and helping us to better understand the nature of sustainability in the context of HEIs and benchmarking. And so we adopted a new name around this data focus, Data for Sustainability. And so the main focus is exploring the benefits of sharing data. And originally the PRISM or the perspective was still around the impact ranking submission format, because that's what we talked about previously, but that doesn't need to be the be all and end all moving forwards. As we've heard, there are various alternatives, but it was very important to all of the members that we do want to focus on best practice and insights. So when we are talking about information, it's for what purpose are we sharing it, and what can we learn from it and how can we use it? And I'll share an example of that coming forwards. And that it is very important to continue engaging and communicating as we move forwards, and that's what is happening through this event and the others that Christina has organized in the past, and will continue to do so. And so the current form of the Data for Sustainability Working Group is on screen. And one of the very interesting points about this is that we are a mixture of sustainability managers and institutional researchers still. And each of us, therefore, each of those have their own perspectives and what's important to them. And that provides quite an interesting insight and dynamic for the group. And I won't list all of the different institutions, but you can see them there, and it's also evolving. So it's open, and I'll mention at the end of the presentation that there is the scope for new people to join as well, and also the direction will likely continue to shift. So, for example, in terms of the different perspectives, there's one member who's really wrestling with problems like where can they invest their university resources in developing greener technologies or in buying greener for the institution. Another one wants to know, well, how best can they improve the reputation or the standing in the benchmarking and the rankings, while others are more looking for opportunities for improving sustainability policies or finding collaborators. So in terms of just looking at the sharing data element at the moment, I think it's clear to everybody here that we generate such a huge amount of information, data points, as universities, higher education institutions, whether that's our research, whether it's our education. We provide some of that in sustainability reports. You get glimpses of it through benchmarking and through rankings, but really there's just a massive volume. And it's not always easy to connect those, and it's not always easy to extract them or get a sense that the information that we are providing is being, say, processed in a way that we would be happy with, or that would provide the adequate context for that. And something that is also clear to us is that stakeholders each bring their own set of interpretations, but as I've mentioned, often the data is similar, if not the same. It's just being looked at through a different lens. And the way that you can extract the data, or that you can get to it, or just simply share it and make it available, are very similar, regardless of what your interests are. So the main open question that we're trying to tackle here, and this is something that will continue with collaboration with CESAER, with Asia, and so on, is how can we share institutional data safely and efficiently to support these different purposes? And something that was very apparent when we started the discussions in the early part of the year were around the different appetites for sharing data. So I think I had naively thought at the beginning of the discussions, we would all within the working group just be very happy to pool all of our submission data, those that had submitted to the Times Higher Education Impact Ranking, and the ones that had not would then submit their own separately, and would be able to look at it. But there was actually quite a lot of reluctance, perhaps from a senior level in some institutions around that. And maybe it was just a lack of clarity or a lack of certainty over what we wanted to achieve. But it seemed that at an operational level, the members were very happy just to say, yes, I would really like to share the data, but they were having more of a challenge convincing their institutions to do that. But that also seems to be evolving. So my understanding is that if you participate, for example, in the impact ranking now, the data that you submit will be available to everyone else that has participated in it. And so this moving on to making the data available, making it transparent, that does seem to be a cultural change that's happening, and I'm very happy about that. And the last point on the slide is just to say that we are iterating through different approaches to better understand what works, and we're learning as we go. And so here is just a very simple example of how sharing data can lead to insights, and many people will have similar examples, but this happened just through our working group quite recently. So for example, the National University of Mexico already published their entire impact ranking submission online in the website. And so I think that's great. You can go and you can access it. So it's in the Spanish language, obviously, but with technology these days, that's not a barrier at all. The Cyprus University of Technology, so a colleague from there, shared their submission with the working group itself through an online collaboration platform, as you can see here. And then he went through the process of saying, well, for SDG 1, we know that UNAM scored more highly than we did. Why exactly was that? And what does that mean for us? Where are the gaps? And so he was able to then spot several areas where probably it led to a lower score. And maybe there are some policy changes or some action plans they can put in place at their university to improve their sustainability capability. And ultimately, I guess, in this case, it would result in a higher score. And so I think that's just a nice example of how, if the data is available, it can be used. And we have others. So we shared a list of our policies around sustainability and how they related to the SDGs, and then had a very initial discussion around that. And you could see some eyes opening as they were able to just understand how different institutions approach policies and developing and reporting on those. So moving on to the next area is just to share the journey around engaging and communicating that we've been on within this working group. And you can see here from the left, starting back in 2020 with the ISCN and the BenchTech members when we formed. In around mid-2020, there was an event, the PHE Impact Ranking, a catalyzer towards more sustainability in universities. And all of these images here are linked to those events with white papers or with videos that you can go and see what the discussion was there if you want to. Moving through to late 2020 and early 2021 was really engaging with the ranking agency, so the THE, QS, also Elsevier as well, to say, well, we found out this from our working group. How do you feel about that? And does that influence your plans? Then we've adopted the new name and the new focus, and now we're participating in this conference today. So I think there are quite a number of our members in the audience as well, which is good news. And then moving on to the future, I'm sure there'll be an ongoing collaboration with CESAER, as David mentioned, and there is an event in the October annual meetings, which I will probably participate on behalf of the Data for Sustainability Working Group. So just as a summary, then, it's really to say that from our perspective, higher education institutions do want a seat at the table in our discussions around how we contribute to sustainability, and to take charge of it to some extent, and not just to be dependent on third parties to tell us how we're doing. There are really a bewildering number of opportunities happening around this. So sustainability is really taken off in the last few years, and even understanding what is happening, what are the available options, what are the challenges and initiatives, and what is the best solution for me. It takes some investment, and so working groups like ours can actually be quite agile. They can help the members to quickly upskill themselves, and also to identify gaps and to work on those, and then to engage with the broader community. And so that's been very powerful. And I would say we do need common approaches for sharing data and facilitating knowledge exchange and understanding. And so STARS is an example, and that works for clearly quite a few institutions, over 1,000 or so, but there are other examples, and each institution will need to consider and make its own choice, and continue to evolve those. And something that is also very apparent is that technology is needed to unlock a lot of this value. So to safely access the data, to make it available, to make sure the interpretations are managed and governed is very important. And universities are all taking a role in data science. They're all building graduates with these IT skills, more or less, and especially universities of science and technology can certainly play a leading role there. And the final point is just a call for greater coordination and collaboration. And this event is an example of how that's already being taken seriously and how it's delivering benefits. So I would say that, yeah, sharing can lead to positive outcomes for all. And the future for us is that we will continue within the working group. There are some contacts here. So Christina, Alex Nobel from EPFL, myself, our email addresses are there. If you are interested in joining us, please do get in touch and let us know. And that's everything from me. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so very much, Paul. I think this was a very good description of the process we have had in our working group. And I think it's good for us to see also that we have a lot of influence in coming from different stakeholders, and we also have this learning process of sharing data. And it has some challenges, of course, because you also need to understand how universities want to share data, because it's very different from different universities. I can see that. Yeah. Thank you so much. And then I think we will have a break before we start the panel debate. And I think we will have 10 minutes again. I think it's good to stretch because we are sitting a lot and we have had a lot of presentations now. So I think we will be back in 10 minutes. And then I think the time will be, yes, we will be back in, 10 minutes. See you then.
Kristina, du där? Kristina?
Ja, jag är här.
Ja, jag var lite usikker på om du sa noe, jeg hørte ikke noe. Så vi starter vel snart, gjør vi ikke det?
Jo, 1 minut.
Ja.
Och sedan så kommer jag också presentera igen innan du startar. Jag har 2 bilder här då som du ser.
Ja. Ja, det är väldigt fint. Och så ger du mig ordet. Ja.
Ja. Gillar inte den där. Får göra om det där. Stop share. Yes, welcome back everyone. I think now it's time to start the panel debate, and I would like to welcome Mats Nygård. He's a Dean of Engineering Education at Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and he is also professor in IDI, Department of Computer Science. And we will have the panel debate with the title, How to Transform all our brilliant ideas into sustainable impact. So this will be a very interesting panel debate. And with us, we will also have Jean Crothers, and she's a data manager at UBC Sustainability Initiative, the University of British Columbia. And she's also a member of the ISCN working group, Data for Sustainability. And together with Mats, he will lead this, he will be the moderator. We will also have all the speakers taking part in this panel debate. So then I will leave the floor to you, Mats, and stop sharing.
Thank you, Kristina. Hopefully you see this one now. So welcome to this panel debate, following up on all the presentations we've had so far. I think we all accept the challenge, and we know what is needed by now. We seem to have a lot of plans. Some actions have been taken, but how do we get the real results we need? What we call sustainable impact, real impact, which stays on with us. So that is going from brilliant ideas, which we all are so good at talking about, partially implementing, how to get from there into sustainable impact. So this is my place, the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, located in Trondheim, Norway, close to the Arctic Circle. I see most of you have bragged about where you come from, so I included this slide just 2 seconds ago. I have included, based on this theme, 3 topics. A holistic approach is important, but is it enough? I will ask questions to a couple of you who have mentioned this. Then we heard from Jacob about equations for sustainability, how to establish them. He talked about the periodic table, but what about the equations? And then maybe one of the most talked about questions, we'd like to measure things. We'd like to measure sustainability, and we'd like to measure our own contribution to sustainability. But as a lot of people have mentioned, it's often easier to measure what is not needed to measure. And it's more difficult to measure what we should measure. And about sustainability, then we also hit the aspects of quantitative data versus qualitative data. We have an excellent panel, all these 5 presenters plus Jan Crothers. I welcome them, and I have presented just this content. I have warned them from the beginning that I'd like them to reflect over the others' statements. Are there any reactions there? That's the first part. Then the second part, the discussion, it will be based on my 3 topics, also some questions I've taken note of during the presentations, and we'd also like to have input from the audience, so to say. So send in questions in the Q&A or chat box and so on. So to save time, let me just start with the reflections over, reactions on. Are there any, I now ask all of you, were there any surprises today? Anything you disagree with, but maybe you do not want to tell them explicitly? Is there anything you'd like to support? Have you changed your views on anything based on what you've heard today? Especially, what have we learned? What would we like to discuss more if we had 2 hours? So I'm talking about the take-home lessons. What would you like to go and knock on your boss's door tomorrow and say, hello, I heard this yesterday. What should we do with that? Or if you're even the president or could be president for a day in your company or your university, what specific ideas or aspects sparked by today's discussions and presentations would you like to take to your board and say, it's vital that we do this? So any comments from you on this? Would you dare to say anything? You're smiling, Megan.
I am. I'm often smiling.
Do you have any feedback?
I do. I mean, I can just share, Mads, that I think perhaps because Jacob spoke first, a lot of his comments really resonated with me because we can talk about sustainability data, metrics, best way to measure, but if we're not able to communicate the impact of all this data, why are we even doing this? And perhaps one of the reasons I was smiling is I was remembering it was one of the last trips that I took before COVID. I was at a climate change conference in Atlanta, and I had a great opportunity to be interviewed essentially for, I'll say, a TV station. Great opportunity. There was like lots of preparation, weeks and weeks leading up to it. And you all are just meeting me, but I've been at ASHE for 12 years, doing sustainability work for 20 years. I was incredibly thoughtful about what I was going to say in this 5-minute TV clip, right? Very, very thoughtful. I send all the talking points to the executive producer. The executive producer calls me like frantically. And as I was in a different session, I like sneak out of the room, like, is everything okay? Like the interview wasn't for a little while. And I was like, what's going on? And he was hemming and hawing. He was like stumbling over his words. Like clearly he had something big to share and didn't know how to say it. And I was like, just tell me. And he was like, you really need to dumb this down. And I was like, whoa. And y'all, I'm not an academic. This was not an academic audience nor content. And it almost was like this, a moment of crisis for me, because I was like, if we can't figure out how to communicate the value of sustainability in higher education, the value of what faculty are doing within institutions of higher education, like we're really screwed. So in any event, Jacob, your comments around communication and the editing process of the SDGs just really resonated with me. So Mads, it's not exactly like controversial, but I really appreciated that. And I still find myself challenged by the notion of communicating beyond those that are already informed, aware, and even beyond academic audiences. So that's what comes to mind for me initially and why I was smiling.
What about going to your boss tomorrow? Do you have anything knocking on his door or her door saying, I learned something new today? Or yes,
their doors would be the board of directors. And I mean, I think it's really heartening to me to hear of all of the networks that exist that are working to advance sustainability in higher education and beyond. And I think the message to the board of directors is, how do we better align with and collaborate with all of these different networks to maximize our collective impact? I think that's sort of my takeaway, just hearing Sdsn, CESAER, like all these different networks, in addition to ISCN. How do we reinforce each other's strengths and even try to make up for weaknesses, right? Like, how are we trying to collectively advance our goals? That's what comes to mind, that I would be going to the board of directors to say, y'all, how do we do this?
Jacob, you got a feedback, direct feedback. We liked your communication part. You are, you're not with a technology background, you are a salesman, isn't that what you started saying? Marketing man. We noticed your skills there. Jacob, any feedback back to Megan or the others?
Well, thank you. First of all, I'm just a nerd, basically, who was building electronics as a kid. So, and then I think that for me, it was that I was doing something that was so nerdy that other people weren't interested in it. So I always wanted to explain what I was doing. I wanted to explain to my sisters how a CD worked, like when that was released. I feel like my life has always been to make things as simple as possible. And I mean, a few observations. You know, the SDGs, which actually, to begin with, is a really bad name for them. They should be called the global goals, because SDGs isn't a thing that you're going to get masses of people excited about. We lost that battle. That was like the main battle that we lost when we created the communication language for it. But I mean, the thing that I'm thinking about is that you know, it has been successful getting them out, I think, because it is serious questions that people care about, but they are actually expressed in a language that people can understand. And I think that, you know, you have to think about the process when you communicate, because like when you communicate from the inside, you communicate to your peers, it can become like, you know, you have a rock band and your friends like it and everyone says that you're great, and people on the outside is like, well, I don't know. I mean, there are better things to do. You know, how does this sound? How does this language that we're using, how does it sound from the outside? And to not, you know, to comment, Megan, the issue of dumbing it down. I mean, I love smart things. I would be the last person to dumb anything down. I just think we have to remember that there's got to be entry points to everything. And the entry points may be like a larger map. And then if you're interested in it, then you go. It's like with the global goals. If the UN had come out with, okay, here we have 169 targets, no one would ever care about it because people would think it was crazy. So putting them into categories where you have 17 categories of the work is immensely important. And you know, I'm sure that Eve knows all about the struggles that was at the end, that there were a big group who wanted 10 goals. That was like the maximum they said you could communicate. Well, I think that we were many who thought that, well, then you had pulled the magnification glass out too far, because, you know, they suggested that we would merge goal 5 with goal 10 because they're all about some kind of equality. But that's not right, because women's rights are so important. So that should be a main goal. So you have to pull the levels to where you, like when you cluster information, and then you always have to think about what's happening from the outside. And to me, one last thing about it is that my communication, I have a more, the new division is only working with sustainability. That's, you know, we have no other jobs. The company in New York that's working with branding has two mottos, and one is discard everything that means nothing, and the other is beauty and logic. And with the beauty and logic, then you're getting to math, right? Then you're getting to equations. Then you're getting to things that should be really smart. They should be as smart as, you know, when BitTorrent came out, who wasn't happy? I mean, I know that it's a problem for copyright issues, but the thought behind that you can share data quicker, you can get data quicker if you share data at the same time. That's like essential to what humanity should be like. So there's so much beauty in thinking, and we should make sure that our thoughts are clear and crisp and beautifully expressed. So, and then everyone is going to get on board, because what we're talking about is essential for building a better world. We don't want to obstruct something. We want to build something better. And that's, you know, what can be more exciting than that?
Thank you, Jacob. Eve, you have an input here?
I do, thank you. Since Jacob specifically mentioned me, and I do recall being on the other side of this debate at the time. My boss had a very visceral, angry reaction against the branding of global goals, and felt that it was technically very important to actually keep this term of sustainable development, which is distinct fundamentally from the term sustainability. And that it was in fact an important sort of teaching point actually to keep this this name. And we were also very much of the limited number of goals advocates, you know, from the basis of having 8 MDGs. We had proposed 10 SDGs. The high-level panel report had proposed 12. I think the 10 to 12 range was what we felt could be effectively understood and communicated. And it really did feel like a defeat when the number 17, of all bizarre prime numbers to land on, 17 just seemed like a particularly strange and difficult one. And, you know, for years, I mean, I pride myself in knowing all the goals and most of the targets and a lot of the indicators, but I still quiz colleagues sometimes, and they still mix up, you know, goals 8 and 9, and, you know, and what's the difference exactly between 7 and 13, and, you know, so I do think there are substantive issues with how the goals have been arranged. But of course, this is a academic and historical debate with no relevance. But sort of to get to the point, I think just in terms of SDSN's work, you know, we have what we have in terms of the 17 SDGs, but this is not an operational framework. This is, you know, we're communicating around this, it's colorful, etc. There's not one government in the world or one company on the planet that has internal operations that resemble anything like these 17 pillars. And so what SDSN has done, and this has been published in the peer-reviewed journal Nature Sustainability, is that we've established a framework we call the 6 transformations, which essentially takes the 17 goals and reorganizes them in an operational framework to say, these are the objectives, but now how do we get there? And the pathway to get there is transforming these 6 pillars. And so there's a transformation around health and well-being. There's a transformation around access to food, sustainable agriculture and food systems. There's a transformation around climate and energy. There's a digital transformation. And this is sort of our suggestion, our recommendation of how to tackle them. And it's been very interesting, actually, the kind of uptake that has gotten I mentioned that I'm based in France. I worked very closely with the French government on the SDG roadmap that was adopted a couple of years ago, which actually takes this idea of 6 pillars of transformation. They modified them slightly, but it is something that they've adopted. And I know a number of other governments around the world have really taken to thinking about the goals in a different way, in a way that makes sense with how their ministries function, how they cooperate, and how they operate.
Thank you.
And I'll leave it at that.
Paul, what did you learn at school today? Anything new?
Well, it's certainly been a great learning experience for me. I have the fortune of being quite well connected with David, for example, with Christina. So I was very familiar with some of the topics, but I think what I've learned is that it's very much an ongoing discussion that, as you mentioned, Megan, in your comments just now, there is a need for greater collaboration so that we can work together. But I'm more just very grateful that this language exists now, the SDGs, and it's continuing to evolve as all languages do. And something that occurs to me is that my role within institutional research is really at the interface between the responsibility sustainability language my institution already speaks. As you've seen, it's got quite a pedigree in this area, and it really is a sustainable campus. But trying to then interface that with the other partners that we work with through these SDGs, and that's something that it's very exciting to be part of.
Jen, we haven't heard anything from you so far. Anything new, anything surprising, anything that you disagree with or you'd like to take to your boss?
Sure. I would like for us perhaps to have a little discussion about the inherent tension between competition and collaboration, because we, as sustainability professionals, we're actually interested in the whole world improving and things changing. But as members of universities, we want our university to be the best. And there's an inherent tension between those two things. I'm not sure I don't think it's necessarily solvable, but one way of counteracting that is what STARS does and has a rating system as opposed to a ranking. But there is the yearly rankings as well with STARS, and then there's the THE and QS and all sorts of other ranking systems. And I'd be interested to hear what others have to say about that inherent tension and if there's anything that we can do about it.
I think that
would like to comment here.
I'm not going to interrupt, but I think that's an amazing question. I'm thinking about competition, collaboration versus collaboration all the time, and how competition starts to feel so old in when you're dealing with complex systems and these kinds of integrated agendas. Exactly,
it's an important question. I thought maybe, or we thought when we designed this session, that maybe one effect could be that the networks that are represented here, maybe they will work closer together after this session, not just because of this session, but so that could point in the direction of cooperation and not just fighting each other. David, would you like to comment? Do you think we, CESAR, will cooperate more with the others?
Thank you very much indeed, Mats, and thank all the previous speakers. Yes, of course, that was the original motivation for us to engage with ISCN, and I think my take-home messages today concern the importance of the reduction of complexity, and I was really very impressed to hear about Sdsn and about the STARS rating system. Those were the two that I haven't spoken to in this journey together with the colleagues from ISCN. So that was highly insightful. And really, I would like to join the colleagues who refer to the importance of communication, as pointed out by Jacob. I think we see that back in university leadership, the importance of communicating this to staff, to faculty, to learners, to teachers. What is a difficult point, I think, and there, of course, I have a very strong convergence with Paul, is this question, and maybe that would be my biggest topic I would bring to my boss, and it feeds into Jen's comment, is this question of sharing data. This is a huge undertaking, not only in terms of streamlining data collections and metadata, but also in terms of copyright, et cetera, et cetera. I do think that from a overall perspective of serving the greater common good, the time is getting closer and closer that we will rethink things. And as you know, the open science movement worldwide is really taking off. And we are not only talking about open access in terms of scientific publications, we're discussing open access to research data. And I think the idea that, as it was formulated here by Paul, to think about ways that we might want to share some institutional data and make it accessible amongst each other, is not in competition with rankers, but just to serve different considerations, such as, you know, development paths and benchmarking, is a very interesting one. And I think here we find a global coalition with the European Union, for example, but also the countries surrounding us in terms of the European Open Science Cloud. Very clear. I think the pandemic helped the way we treated data with regards to the virus and the clinical testings, et cetera. So I think there is a very strong momentum here, and I'm really delighted to see where this is going. And I mean, I can just sort of finish it off from the side of CESAR. We have a very strong principle in our association, and that is to forge strategic partnership, to avoid duplication of efforts, to create complementarity. So we'd be very much looking forward to work with a lot of the colleagues here. Thanks, Mats.
Thank you, all of you. I'd like to, based on the time, I'd like to go back to the 3 topics I mentioned here. And maybe we could start with the last one about measuring. 2 of the presenters talked about this, Megan and also Eve. So Megan, you talked about measuring sustainability. We also talk about measuring the contribution to sustainability. Are we asking the right questions, or are we asking the easy questions? And is it better to rate than rank, which most people have changed from rank to rate over the years? And what about sustainability? Are there any quantitative sensible numbers, or are we talking about qualitative numbers? I'm trying to provoke a debate here. So Megan?
I'll try to answer maybe 2 of those 5 questions, I think there was, but yeah, thanks, Mats. I appreciate you teeing that up. And, you know, all I can share is from my perspective and sort of the approach we've taken in the development of STARS. And as Jen mentioned earlier, like, we were really intentional initially of having a rating system and not wanting to be responsible for saying, of our members, here's the best, here's the worst. We wanted everyone to have a positive association, and we wanted to, I'll say, reward and celebrate any steps towards sustainability. Because even though we like, and even the institutions represented here today, beyond just the panel, in many cases have staff, like teams of people, budget, etc. But like the typical ASHE member is maybe a public institution in North America that has 1.25 staff and like no resources. So, you know, while there's, I'll say, sort of the elite institutions that are doing amazing stuff, most institutions that are in the ASHE community are struggling. So with that in mind, I think back in the evolution of STARS initially was sort of tell us everything you're doing as it relates to STARS. And pretty quickly it was like, oh my gosh, we don't really care if you have a newsletter on your campus. Or we started to prioritize measurable outcomes as opposed to tactics, right? So trying to make sure that even though there's so much value in information sharing between campuses around this is how we did this from a STARS perspective and trying to enable the process to be less onerous, we were striving for, at this point, an emphasis on measurable outcomes. And that there's other ways to share sort of the, oh, and this is how we accomplished this. This is how we got there, our annual conference, educational sessions, et cetera. But Mads, to your point, like, are we asking the right questions? I would say yes and no, right? Like, I mean, we have changed STARS. It's on version 2.2 right now. There are some drastically different credits that are included in the system right now, and there are very similar credits that were there a decade ago. I will say, and the sort of message that I've been trying to harp on the past 3 years is STARS right now, much that we are trying to have this be an internationally relevant system, it's really hard to make one system applicable to any institution anywhere on the planet. And I would say, as a predominantly white organization serving a predominantly white community within North America, and I would say Europe as well, there's inherently bias and gaps in STARS that we are working to rectify. Again, we're working to center racial equity and social justice in everything that we do. And I think that includes the content of STARS, what we're measuring, how we're measuring it. And I wish that was sort of like, oh, by September, we'll be done with that. But you all know, I mean, Paul, I don't know how long your research took, but like, even looking in and measuring and understanding these measurements, these systems, like that takes time, let alone trying to develop systems and improve systems that are really going to, within ASHE, the term we always use is rigor. We want STARS to be a rigorous system that still has an easy entry point. And that is a really tricky balance. And then adding to that, trying to fill the gaps in perspective and addressing equity, racial equity, and social justice. I think that means bringing in more people, collaborating even more, and that likely means also extending the process, right? Extending the timeline. So I think maybe I addressed a couple of your questions, but I also want to hear from my colleagues here about these questions and even anything I just shared. I'd be really curious to hear.
Yes, I'd like to hear from, thank you, Megan. I'd like to hear from Eve, because you also mentioned, I think you said ranking countries. Ranking is more difficult than rating. Ranking institutions and not just departments or faculties is even tougher, but ranking countries, isn't that even a tougher challenge? What do you say, Eve?
Thanks, Mads. We rank, we rate, and we have detailed dashboards for all 193 UN member states. I don't think it's more difficult than an institution, because this is, the national statistical offices, the World Bank, UN stats, all exist to measure country level data. I don't know of a single university on the planet that has those kind of resources to track their impact or their own sustainability. That would be absurd. So this is the default unit of measurement at the global level is, of course, the country level. I think one way that we've innovated beyond sort of other reports and rankings that exist on the SDGs is a few ways. The first one is that we evaluate a distance to target, meaning that we have actually quantified and defined what it means for a country to achieve specific goals. There are some goals where it's clear, 0 poverty, 100% health coverage, other ones where there isn't a quantifiable level of achievement. So that's something that through our expert consultations, we've determined and defined. Another thing that's important and reflective of the interconnected world we live in is that we take into consideration for OECD countries the notion of spillovers. None of these countries are operating in isolation from one another, and Western-driven consumption is obviously a huge driver of biodiversity loss, deforestation, pollution, climate change, what have you, all around the world. And so we do try to really provide a full picture of a country's national performance on SDGs, but also how they're impacting the whole world and supporting other countries to achieve the SDGs, for example, through bilateral cooperation, development assistance, technical cooperation, or hindering achievement of the SDGs as well through selling of weapons, exporting pollution, etc. And so we do try to give really this holistic picture. It adds, of course, a degree of complexity to the measurement, but we think it's fundamental as well.
Thank you. Megan said she would like to hear the opinions from the others.
And I saw Jen's hand.
Okay, sorry. I didn't see that. Jen, come on.
Yes, sure, thanks. Yeah, one, I will talk about the two sort of question rating systems, ranking systems that I know best, STARS and the Times Higher Education Impact Ranking. And one of the strengths of STARS is that it's incredibly diverse, like the amount of things that you can, that you have to get answers for and so on. It goes, like Megan said, across the university. And one of the weaknesses of STARS is that it's so diverse and you have to go across the university. And it's a massive, massive undertaking. And yet, so the question about are we asking the right questions, that compares, I think, to, say, the Times Higher Education Impact Ranking, where it's a lot simpler. You only need to do 3+1 compulsory SDG to be ranked. It can take a lot less time, but I definitely found myself going through going, why are they asking this question? What does this mean? This doesn't mean anything. And so it's less. And obviously they've tried to make it comprehensive within that, but you know, they've like tried to crunch down the SDGs to, I think it was like 250, something like that, indicators, and then STARS, so big. And so, again, I don't even think that there is an answer to, are we asking the right questions? Because it just depends. Like if you want something to be accessible, you have less questions. But if you want it to be accessible, then those questions don't really get to the detail of all the little things. One of the great things about STARS is that at the end you can say, and what else are you doing? Is there anything else that we haven't asked about that you can tell us about that you think is great and that you are proud of? I think that's a great little thing at the end that you can say, yeah, we're doing this innovative thing that's new. So another inherent tension.
A lot of tensions. Paul?
Yes, just in support of what Jen is saying, I mean, I was really pleased to learn today that STARS, for example, has this reporter level, which I wasn't really aware of beforehand, and providing stepping stones to institutions to allow them to just access the information they need it when they need it for the questions, as I think Jen is saying, and also in kind to provide their own information to that pot, their own data to then, you know, have a snowball effect. I think that would be very useful for institutions.
Any other comments, David?
Thanks a lot. Just to shortly reflect, I think also Lisbeth from DTU has quite an interesting point there. Yeah, I do think that once you kind of move out of the reputation part, ranking as such becomes far less important. maybe different story about the performance. I think methodologically speaking, the reputation and the performance part are easier to catch in terms of quantitative data and methodology than, for example, institutional development paths and particularly impact. And maybe this ties me back to your comment, Jen, in the beginning. We might be very competitive on the reputation and on the performance part, but when it comes to the institutional development paths and the impact, I think we all know that the collaboration is really very dear to us. And I think indeed, Lisbeth, the very idea could be that universities start sharing data safely, aligning data collections in a way that they would actually be able to access this data without having to pay. I mean, in terms of open science, there's a very clear legal concept here. It's called the invocation of retention rights. And I think that's quite an important way forward in terms of thinking. But if you allow me, Mats, I would like to touch upon the other two topics that you brought up here. Is a holistic approach enough? And I think certainly not. And I'm pretty...
David,
yes.
I haven't come to that one. That's the last one. Could you just wait? I'd like to finish this one. I'd like to go to number 2 now. Equations for sustainability. Jacob, I liked your title. You said equations for sustainability. And I wondered, what is that? But at least it made me include that as a topic. And I said, they are vital, but how to establish them? You mentioned in your presentation about the periodic table, and that's sensible. But I do not think you mentioned the word equations one time. Maybe I misheard you, but I think it's connected to your saying everything is interconnected. So the equation part, like for nerds like me, Maxwell's equations, it's about how things are linked. Is that what you mentioned or you thought about when you said equations for sustainability? And if that is so, is it possible to establish such equations that says something, it would say something about how are these linked? Could we put a value on it? Is there any linkage between them that may be quantified? Jacob.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't talk that much about equations because that would have been a long presentation. But I think that the important thing is that, you know, how do we define an equation? For me, if I make dinner and I have a friend who does the dishes after, that's an equation. Like, you know, there are equations everywhere, like everything, like with my kids doing their homework, that's an equation because that means something else, you know. So an equation doesn't only have to be math, but it can go from human interactions. And then you can also talk about the oldest equation we have on the planet, which is our ecological systems. Those are all equations, and there are equations that are developing all the time where certain, you see it especially when you're studying biodiversity. And I think that what we have to look at, if we're going to look at this complexity we have to understand how elegant equation works, because sustainability can only be defined by the most elegant equations, according to me. And I think that, you know, the reason why we are in the pickle we're now is that we have used equations that has been so far from elegant. And sometimes we want to be nice to ourselves, because I don't believe too much in blame and guilt. But you can say that, well, we didn't know, we didn't understand that there was some factors in these equations when we build our wealth, when we build our prosperity, that actually was damaging for the very prosperity that we build. We didn't have the full equation. And I think that it's clarifying to think about everything that we do as an equation. And if it's, you know, there is factors in it that we don't know. And the factors, if we notice that there's huge benefits from this, then we should look at very closely about the interconnected issues, because it's the same thing as our technological evolution has, as a matter of fact, been a constant movement of solving problems and creating new problems. You know, it's every new innovation that we've done, almost every, we're starting to make really smart innovations today. But in the past, they were not smart because we didn't understand the equations. And some people knew the equations. The oil companies and the cigarette companies, they knew the equations, but they ignore them for profit. And that means that they had really bad equations. And now we're eating those equations. So if we had had a clearer insight of this balancing act, if we would have studied the ecosystems closer and understanding that we're part of the ecosystem, we wouldn't be so stupid.
Thank you, Jacob. Now I understand what you said. This brought my attention, so thanks for getting the extra info from you. Any short comments back to Jacob on this before we go to the holistic approach? Anyone would like to share? If not, we go to the first one. And David brought it up, also Megan. Maybe I should start with Megan. What is a holistic approach to you? I think David, in his presentation, meant that we have to include more aspects. But do we also have to integrate them? Is it enough just to say, oh, to be able to have a sustainable impact, to save our world, we just have to look at more numbers or factors? Or do we have to look at them in an integrated way, like the equation aspect that Jacob talked about? So, Megan, one question. What is holistic approach to you?
Mads, I'm sorry just to interrupt because the time is pulling away and soon we need to end this session, but take this last question to Jen.
2 more minutes, yep. So Megan, would you like to?
No pressure. Stars. I guess one word answer. Holistic sustainability to me is looking comprehensively and integrated to thinking about sustainability in an integrated way. So I absolutely agree with what Jacob was just saying. And I think, again, just because my focus this morning has been on stars, that was the intention in developing stars, was thinking holistically about the institution. But I absolutely agree, as said, I think Jacob said, or maybe it was David, I'm forgetting now, that we can't isolate one SDG. We need to look at them as a collective. So similarly within stars or some of the other tools we're thinking about, I think we need to be thinking about things holistically and in an integrated way.
David, you get the last comment. Again, holistic approach for you.
Listen, as you know, university academics and academic institutions don't work in isolation towards contributing to tackling these local and global challenges. And I'm actually a little bit concerned looking around, you know, and there are some of those equations around protectionism, nationalism, populism versus multilateralism, profit servitude versus common good, you know, autocratic government interference. You know, it's not far away much. I mean, you know, the Trump government and what happened to geo-observational data in the US, expropriation laws in the EU, kicking out our closest allies in the EU framework program on quantum. So I think the combination much of these key technologies, quantum, artificial intelligence, and the you know, the naivety of politicians in this respect, combined with a changed geopolitical order, are a dangerous cocktail. And if you read the news today, how the nations making up G7 pump billions of dollars into fossil industries and not into the green transition, you know, this is, it threatens to be bearing water to the sea. And I think that is where we in science, in academia, need to play a leading role also in making people aware of what's going on and combating these things. And in the end, it's about safeguarding scientific integrity, academic freedom, institutional autonomy, also in our own system.
Thank you, David, and thank you to all of you. Excellent presentations, excellent debate seen from my side. My take-home message is that meeting, talking to each other and motivating each other has proven its importance once more in our quest for, and David, thank you, for culture of sustainability. Thank you, and back to Christina.
Thank you for a great panel debate and for the moderating you did, Mads. I think that was great. I will share the screen once before we end this session. And I will have some slides then. And before that, I think I will try to summarize this session. I think it has been great discussions, and all the speakers have contributed to give a lot of different kinds of views. And I think that shows that we need different competences and that we need to work together. And when we started this session from a very broad perspective, Jacob, he introduced us to the SDGs and how they have been developed. And I think that we also could see that all of the speakers today, they use the SDGs in their presentations in some way. So I think we could say, yes, we have a common tool for communicate the work we're doing with sustainability, even if we are using that in different way and we have different missions. And then we had a good understanding from Eve, how the UN is contributing to the SDGs and the implementation of them in a very practical way. And for me, it was great to see how UN reach out worldwide, working with different stakeholders. Even if that is your mission, I think that was a very great understanding. And one of them, stakeholders you're working with, and that we will work more with, is the higher education institutions. And from that, with David's presentation, we discussed the holistic approach, and also to see that it's quite complex how the universities should work reaching out for sustainability. And we also need to work very practical and understand how we can measure the impact we have concerning education, research, and collaboration, but also the impact we have from our campuses, our traveling, and so on. So I think that Megan and Paul, they give us a good understanding on how we can measure sustainability, and also the needs of sharing data and to be open-minded if we want to reach out to each other and understand this complex work with sustainability and how we should measure the impact that the universities has. And still we have a lot to do concerning how we would like to measure our research, for an example. And I think in the panel debate, you, Mads, you summarized that, but what I really could hear is the discussion about competition versus the needs of collaboration. And for me, as an old person that is running a lot, and I have done a lot of athletics competition, I think we need both. I don't think you can say that that is enough with collaboration. I think also we need some competition, because that is the drivers. And we can see that our top management at universities and so on, I think that is one way to promote the universities. And still we have this old way of looking at universities with world rankings also. And are they good enough? Are they meeting the future and how the universities should work in a more holistic approach? And then I can't stop thinking about that in some way. We are coming back to ourselves. We need of course, to see what's happening with us as individuals working as at universities. And I think then I will come back what Jacob also said in the beginning. What is the driver for us to make this happen? The transformation to sustainability. And I think we are still, and I think that is the biggest challenge. We are stuck in our habits, our daily activities, what we are doing, and how can we change them? I think this is a very important social and cultural issues that we sometimes need to discuss more, because that is difficult. We have our habits in our daily life. So my question still is this transformation. Are we moving forward fast enough? Are we doing enough for saving the planet? I don't think so. So I think we are working and we have all these good initiatives, and they should, of course, continue. But in some way, even if we are very sad about Corona and this COVID we have had, it has shown that we can change if we really need to do that. And that is something for me very important when we are discussing the climate issues at the university. So with that summary from this very, very interesting session, I'm so happy that you all took your time to contribute to have this discussion in our ISCN network. It meant a lot for us. And I can also see that we have developed new connections. And therefore, I think the next step, as you see in this slide, is that ISCN invites UN and different university networks to strengthen their collaboration by sharing experience, and that we maybe also would like to focus on different topics. And with that, I will also thank you all for participation in this session and all the participants that have been listening to our session. We want to come in touch with you, and I hope we also can work with you and strengthen the work we have tried to highlight today. So at KTH, we have a slogan that says that we are working for a sustainable future every day. And I think that is a very important message that we need to really implement the sustainability work in our daily activities. Otherwise, we will not have the change. And then you can see this photo. And this is from my summer holiday place I have in Umeå, and it's in the north of Sweden. And you can't imagine, but the time and the hour, this is in the summer, it's 12 o'clock in the night. And with that, I would like to end this session and say that I'm looking forward to a brighter tomorrow, like this very nice light you have in Sweden. So thank you all, and I hope we will come together again and discuss how we can move forward in this very important work. So all of you take care, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.